Alright, so today we're going to be working on reviewing the principles of graphic design, and we're going to be using Sumo Paint to practice those principles of graphic design. So what I did was I created a quick slideshow so that we could be able to go over and review what the principles of graphic design are. Okay, so first we have scale and proportion, which we already saw from the PDN. Scale and proportion is a difference in size or quantity. Okay, so the difference or size or quantity. So if we look at this picture here, we see that we have a guy who's fishing on a boat, and then he's catching a fish. Clearly, so this picture shows that it's out of proportion because we have this massive fish hit right here, and then we have this little bitty guy who's catching the fish on the boat. Okay, so one of the design principles, one way that you can approach this is by creating a design like this, having one image that's really small and one image that's really big. Okay, and then we have repetition. Repetition is repeated use of the same or similar elements. So in this design here, we have swirls. We're just using a basic swirl to create this repetition. So this element is being repeated over and over and over again, and so these are all connected. If we look closely, they're all connected, and it's basically the same swirl, and that's what we're using to represent repetition. So it's the same basic line pattern to create repetition. Okay. And then we have asymmetric balance. Asymmetric balance is a design that has equal weight but is not identical on both sides. This is also a good example of scale or proportion. So if you look at this design, we have one big triangle here, and then we have three small triangles on the right hand side. Okay, so here these three small triangles basically carry the same weight as this one larger triangle. So they take up about the same amount of space, even though they look different. So they hold the same weight, but they're equal. Okay, they're not identical, but they're equal in weight. And also we have scale and proportion because we have one triangle here, a 1:3 proportion. So we have one big triangle and we have three small triangles. You can also do a 1:2 proportion or a 1:4 proportion, but this is an example of a good 1:3 proportion. Okay, so you can also do something so simple as that. Next we have rhythm and movement. I like this one because it shows the repetition of an element to create movement. Okay, so we have two like body silhouettes as our basic design, and we have their outlines being repeated to create movement. So it almost creates an effect like the bodies are radiating, right? So that they're moving outward. Okay. Next we have contrast. Contrast is two different elements that are next to each other. Okay. So for contrast, we have the basic contrast black versus white. We have that both in the background, but we also have it in the lettering here. So the letters on this side are white with a black background, and then we have a white background with the black lettering. Okay, that represents contrast. And then emphasis. Very basically, one thing stands out. Okay, so for emphasis, we have three blue dots here, and then we have one red dot that's standing out from the others. Okay, so we're creating emphasis by putting a focus on that red dot. And we have symmetric balance. Symmetric balance is where you can cut the image in half and it's going to be the same on both sides. So if we were to cut the Batman logo in half and fold it on top of each other, both sides are going to be the exact same. Okay, so that's going to be our review for our symmetric balance. I'm also going to post this in our Google Classroom. Next, what we're going to do is go on to Sumo Paint. So the first thing that you need to do for the assignment, which is going to be create a design using the elements or principles of graphic design, you're going to go on Google. Okay, so when you go on Google, you're going to type in Sumo Paint. Okay, Sumo Paint, and it's going to, you'll click on it, it's going to take you to this screen. You're going to click on the first link, sumopaint.com. When you get to sumopaint.com, because we've used this in class before, I don't have to run the Flash player, but you may need to run the Flash player. So when you click online, click try online, it's going to take you to this screen. You're just going to scroll down. Do not click on these icons at the top because it will take you to a different website. You're just going to scroll down. As you see, it's going to bring us to a paint window. If it doesn't pop up, that means that you have to run the Flash player, and the Flash player should pop up in this top right hand corner here. Okay, if you look at my mouse, it's going to pop up somewhere on your screen, usually in this top right hand corner. Okay, so without further ado, how to use Sumo Paint. For those of us who have not used Sumo Paint, on the right is going to be very similar to your regular paint on any other computer. Okay, so if you hover above the icons, it's going to give you an example or a brief description of what the tools do. So very simply, we have the magic wand, we have a lasso tool, we have an ink tool, we have an eraser tool, a pencil tool, and a paint bucket tool, gradient fill tool. We have a variety of shape tools, but we also have symmetry tools. A couple ones that I want to point out is going to be the gradient fill tool, because with the gradient fill tool, this is a great tool that you can use to create a background. So, and it's also going to help us to use a lot of those elements or principles of graphic design. And when we use the gradient fill tool here, we're going to click on it, and at the top they're going to give us a few options. Okay, you can click on linear, linear reflected, linear repeated, radial, radial reflected, radial repeated, angle gradient, spiral gradient. I'm going to click on spiral gradient for the example. We can also change the blend mode. So how do we want this to show up? Each of these is going to give us a different effect. We can change how drastic the spiral is. So the percentage of spiral that we want is going to go by percentage. So when you change the percentage, it's going to change how your spiral looks, basically based off of how tight or how loose the spiral is. Okay. And the most important is clicking on the color at the top. This is going to allow you to choose what you want your backdrop to look like. So I clicked on the greenish backdrop, and what we're going to do is click back on the screen. When you click back on the screen, if you press it, it's going to give you a very simple backdrop. Okay, but you can also tap on the screen and drag. Sometimes it does this, which is I'm happy that it did this, because sometimes it'll lag and you need to wait for it to catch up. So we're just gonna wait for a second for it to load. If you continue to click on it, it will freeze the computer, so just wait for it to load so that the computer can catch up. This is very common, don't freak out. Just wait for it to catch up and you will be able to continue working. Okay, so again, we're just going to open up a new image. If it does happen where the program lags, you can just open up a new, you can close out that window, or you'll be able to go to File. In the top left hand corner is you can click on New Image. Once you click on New Image, you're just going to press OK, and it's going to give us a new image. Okay, so we're going to do a different effect for the purpose of demonstration. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Radio Reflected. Okay, I'm using the same color pattern. Blend mode, I have it on normal, and you can change the focal point, but for the sake of example, I'm not going to change the focal point. What you're going to do is click on the screen and you can drag it. So when you click and drag, it's going to give you a lot of different options for how it's going to look on your screen. And again, this is a great way to create the backdrop for your design, and it's a good way to use at least one of the principles of graphic design. Okay, once you create your backdrop, you can use the symmetry tool. The symmetry tool is really cool because you can change the number of points, you can change the way that the brush looks, and you can also change the mode. Okay, and if you add gravity, then it'll make it have more of a normal looking effect. Okay, so what that looks like is you're gonna click on the screen and you can move your mouse, and it's gonna give you another symmetrical design. Okay, so this would be a great way to use the symmetric balance principle of graphic design, but it will also be a great way to use repetition and movement. Okay, so if we were to do the same thing, we can just repeat this design and it'll give us movement. Let's do that one more time. So I'm going to open up a new screen, and just looking at the symmetry tool this time, I'm just going to use that brush. Okay, and we can use repetition, and it's going to give us a repeated kind of design where we can use a different design principle. Okay, very basic. Now what you're going to do is you're going to create a design for each of the design principles. Okay, so you're going to create a design for repetition, scale and proportion, asymmetric balance, rhythm and movement, contrast, emphasis, symmetric balance. And from those designs, you're going to pick your favorite one. So you'll be able to save them all, and you're going to pick your favorite one, and you're going to email it to Mr. Thompson. And my email is going to be in the Google Classroom. So how do you save it? You're going to click File, okay, in the top left-hand corner, Save to my computer, and where it says Name, you're going to put your last name and the principle that you want to use. We're going to save it as a JPEG, okay, or a JPG. So how I want you to save it is you're going to put your last name and the principle that you're working with. For example, Thompson, symmetric balance, or Thompson, rhythm, movement. It's going to save to your computer. Once you save it to your computer, then you can email it to me to the email that's inside your Google Classroom. Alright? If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message and I will answer your questions. Awesome.